thank you for being here. Thank you for being at the Jamboree. Um, want to share with you a few thoughts, and then we'll do some Q&A, and anything and everything is open. Um, my role, if you're wondering what a commissioner does, we have about 30,000 commissioners in the United States, and you can think of us as um, the chief morale officers of the program. Um, we're the top uniform volunteers in terms of unit service. Our job is to make sure that your unit experience is fun and changes your life. So we like to think of ourselves as the best resource for a unit to make sure you have a fun experience. I also serve as a member of our Key 3, which is kind of a full-time volunteer job. And Brad Tilden is our chair, and Roger Mosby is our chief scout executive, and that's the Key 3. Wanted to talk a little bit. You know, it's been an interesting last 3 or 4 years. It's great to be at the summit, great to be here together. In the last 3 years, I've particularly focused on identifying stories that show that scouting really works, that it really changes lives. And I want to mention a few, and then we're going to talk about some elements of leadership coming out of the Scout Law, and I need your help to do that. The first story is really very brief, but it's one that really impacted me and a lot of people around the country that heard the story. And it's about a young lady named Kaylee who was on the trail to Eagle. She was from Wisconsin, and she became very ill and ended up in the hospital and was struggling, frankly. And one of the things the first thing she wanted to do when she was able was she wanted to use an iPad to zoom into her Scouts BSA Girl Troop meeting while they recited the Scout Oath and Scout Law at the start of the meeting. Because she had, at the age of 14, internalized for her what those 40 words in the Scout Oath and the 12 points of the Scout Law meant to her in her life. And then if you believe that there's a larger power in charge of our lives, which I do, I reached out, my 7-year-old grandson, who's a Cub Scout, and we had Cub Scout sending care packages to Kaylee from all over the country. Asked how she was doing, so I called and talked to the Scout executive. And we caught up on Kaylee, and then he says, well, I may need your help with something. I need to get some heroism awards through the national office for an award ceremony that we're going to hold at the Green Bay Packers Stadium. And I said, wow, this sounds interesting. How many are there? Well, there's 16 of them that we want to award at one time. And I says, well, what in the world is this? Well, it turns out you may have heard the story about the group that was coming home from Philmont Scout Ranch and was on the train, and the train derailed in the middle of the night. So if you imagine you're asleep and all of a sudden your train car is rolling over, they described it as like waking up inside a washing machine. Okay? And and I've gotten to meet many of these scouts, just incredible human beings. And one of the stories coming out of that event was one scout looked to the other and said, you go left, I'll go right. And then they proceeded to engage, to use their scout training to help the people that had been on that train until the first responders could respond really what was sometime later, given where they were located. So both Kaylee and the derailment train heroes are from the same council, and I got to go up and speak to their council and connect with these people. And wow, what a story to have that coincidence together. Um, what do you think? What do you think are the most important parts of the Scout law? What? Yes, sir. Helpful. Okay. What other? What others? Yes, sir. Thrifty. Yeah. Trustworthy. All right. Anyone else? Brave. I like brave. Yes, sir. Loyal. Okay. Um, let me tell you a little bit about my story, and you've hit on some of my favorites. Um, let's talk about brave for a minute. I don't know if you had the chance to see one of our speakers who was down. Julie Sweet was down at the main arena. One of the things she said that I really liked was, if your dreams don't scare you, then you're not dreaming big enough. I thought, wow, I like that. And it actually took me back to a time when I was, I don't know, 16, 17 and exploring, and went to Washington for a conference. We used to have this conference in Washington, had about 3,000 young people at it. And we elected national officers, very much like a political convention. And just by happenstance, it turned out I was sitting next to a young man who was running for national president. And we were talking, and he was getting ready for his speech in front of 3,000 people. And he was absolutely terrified. And I understood that, because speaking in front of 3,000 people is kind of a tough thing to do at any age. But the more I talked to him, the more I realized, well, wait a minute. I think I can come back next year and run for office. So I made that decision at that point to come back and run for office, and my campaign was actually successful. And putting myself out there, being brave, dreaming big, put me in a situation where I was able to travel the world with scouting for about 3 years. I ended up meeting my wife, who is here somewhere, hiding in the shade. Oh, she's over here on the statue. She was a delegate from Indiana and asked me out on our first date. We've been married 45 years now. I was speaking to a group the other day, and I said it was 47, and she yelled out from the audience, "No, it's 45." So I won't make that mistake again. So, seizing that moment, seizing that opportunity has really changed my life. And I went on to go to law school and became a lawyer in a large firm. And another moment I remember, we were doing an investigation for a bank, and the allegation was that they were laundering money for drug dealers. Okay, not a good allegation if you're in the management of a bank. And the partner on the file, I was a third-year associate, was in Washington, and we had a tipster call in and basically laid the case out for us. So I went down, scared to death, and met with the board of directors, and we ended up firing the chief executive officer and the chief financial officer and the marketing guy, because we had them all implicated on videotape, counting the drug money after hours and putting it in the vault. Okay, so I had the obligation to my client to get them out of the institution, and that set a path for my legal career. So kind of interesting. You got to be brave. Got to be willing to challenge yourself. So let's see, what else? Any other points out there that resonate with you that we haven't talked about? Clean. Okay. What about kind? I haven't heard kind. Um, and one of the things that worries me, frankly, is I think all of us have been on a journey the last 2 or 3 years. We've all been stressed. Everybody is carrying a different kind of burden, and there's only so many video games you can play and Zoom calls you can be on when you can't get outside. And thank goodness we're now in the outdoors again. And, you know, your generation, my generation too, has suffered a lot of stress coming through this environment, a lot of loneliness. And the one thing that most impressed me about the World Jamboree, my favorite story, and this was an event with a $60 million budget. We planned program like you wouldn't believe. The thing that became my favorite story had nothing to do with anything we planned. So the first night of the Jamboree, we were loading in 30,000 people on buses. So you can figure out how many buses that is at 50 people a bus. All the Americans, Mexicans, and Canadians were already on site as the host. And it was raining cats and dogs. It was just like a typical scout campout, right? When you're trying to set up your tent and everything is pouring on your head. So one of the American troops, during this torrential rainstorm, we were actually rebuilding the road system and had graders rebuilding the roads, and the buses were following the graders to the campsites. They were looking around trying to figure out who's going to be camping next to them. And they discovered there was an Italian group coming in, but they weren't going to arrive till like 3:30 in the morning. So the American scouts set up the tents of the Italian unit and the other surrounding units. So the Italians came in, got there about 3:45, 4 o'clock, piled their stuff in their tent that was already set up. Their kitchen was already set up. The Italians took a little nap. But they got up about 5:30 and went and got the food and came back and cooked this gourmet meal for the Americans and woke them up singing Italian songs. And that became the start for me of what was the most important part of the Jamboree. It was people reaching across cultures, languages, countries, religious differences. The fact that they were different is what drew them together. And they had breakfast together, and then they decided, and I heard this story last night for the first time, they consolidated their campsites. So they really became one new troop. And then that led to these large communal meals with 50 and 100 picnic tables lined up where youth from around the world were just wanting to get to know each other. And your generation, you know, my sense is you do have this fundamental kindness to your soul. You want to take care of each other. You want to change the world. God bless you for that. And scouting gives you an avenue to do that. The last one I wanted to talk about is trustworthy. And somebody mentioned trustworthy. And, you know, I think of trustworthy as an indication of your character. When no one is looking, do you do the right thing? And I have learned over the years in our family life and the legal practice and all of these many Boy Scout positions that trying to live by the Scout Oath and Scout Law also helps you develop a gut instinct for what is right. And you always have to follow that gut instinct. And if you do, is normally going to turn out pretty well. And if you feel something that's not quite right, then step back mentally and pause and think about it. Do you remember the story of Jimmy Valvano, who was a basketball coach? Does that name mean anything to you? This was, he made an incredibly famous speech about 30 years ago at the ESPY Awards. And he was receiving the Arthur Ashe Award for courage. And he was fighting cancer at the time and didn't know how much long he had. And he gave this really incredibly impactful speech that is still talked about today, and you can find it on social media, of course. And the theme they talk about is don't give up. Don't ever give up. And he used that throughout his speech. But he had a subtext that I really liked a lot in terms of managing your daily life. The first point was to laugh every day. Bring joy into the life of others. I mean, physically laugh. And scouting's fun, and I've been watching you around the Jamboree site. My sense is you're doing pretty well at number one. The second one was think. Take time to think every day. And that's good advice. And the third point is care about something enough that it makes you cry every day. And I will tell you, having seen how much scouting has affected so many lives and the thousands of stories I've heard in the past 3 years, I'm now in the 4th year of my 2-year term as National Commissioner. It really speaks to me, because there are times when I tell these stories that I kind of lose it. And some of the people I'm talking to lose it. Brad Tilden and I kind of play back at each other and see who will break up first with some of the scout stories that we have heard over the years. And so laugh, think, and cry a little bit. That's okay. That kind of emotion will change your life. I want to leave you, before we do some Q&A, with our cultural commissioner statement. We tried to capture in a very short, impactful statement what it means to be a commissioner. But frankly, this isn't limited to commissioners. It can be your unit leaders. It can be you as a scout. It can be your chartered organization supporters. It's really very simple. The first phrase is be the heart. Okay, think about what being the heart of scouting means to you. I have a definition. I expect you do too, particularly after hopefully you've experienced a life-changing experience here at the Jamboree and see that you're part of something much larger than yourself. But I think we'd also have a lot of commonality if we were to go around the room and talk about what be the heart of scouting means. The second part is true for scouting to be successful, but it's really true in your personal life. It's about build relationships. Everything in your life is going to be built on a relationship, and we've got to take care of each other. And I know that's important to your generation, and we have to make that a focus of what we do as a movement. As we grow the movement, we're growing and change more lives. And that's the third phrase, change lives. How many have been to Philmont? Anyone here been to Philmont? Okay, a few. Philmont, they have a ranger that leads your crew out on the hike, 70-mile hike with backpacks and so forth. It's a character test. And sometimes your ranger is only about 18 years old, and sometimes they haven't taken that many crews out, and all of a sudden they're being given the responsibility for carrying a dozen scouts and leaders out into the trail the first 2 or 3 days before the ranger goes back to base camp and you're on your own. So it's a big job. And when you go in to get the information on your crew, you go to the ranger office at Philmont. And as you go out, there's a sign over the door. And the sign says, "Change Lives." And the tradition as a ranger is as you go out the door, is you reach up and touch the sign. And then you go out and get your crew. And I would hope that as you go home to your units and your communities and, you know, your schools where you've got friends that are stressed out, friends that need friendship and support and love and respect, that you kind of think back to that sign and just think change lies figuratively in your mind, and it will make a world of difference in the type of life you lead. It will define who you are, because a life of service is really rewarding.